Our guy was just an average man with one not-so-average obsession. He was fixated on Murim games and wanted to live in that world. Not for the glory or honor, but for the gore and brutality. A lawless place where the strong killed freely and no one answered for it. Since reality wouldn't give him that world, he created his own. He began kidnapping criminals, people who had committed serious crimes but escaped justice, and carried out slow, methodical killings in his warehouse. To him, it wasn't murder, it was public service. Eventually, the police caught up with him, but even with a gun pointed at him, he refused to let his prey go. He finished what he started and took the bullet. As he lay dying, his final thought wasn't regret. It was a wish, to be reborn in a Murim world. And then, he woke up. In a broken body, dragging himself to the door, he realized the truth. His wish had come true, and he laughed. Not a normal laugh, something feral. In this world, there were no laws, no police, no consequences, only a brutal reality where killing was a way of life. For a predator like him, this wasn't just a second chance, it was paradise. Rain lashes against the tiled roofs of the Black Death sect. A sign hangs precariously in the storm, marking the territory of the wicked. From the shadows of the gate, a figure emerges, his form obscured by a wide straw hat and a heavy cloak. Panic erupts among the guards as they realize the nameless swordsman has arrived. Shouts of alarm pierce the thunder, urging the mob to kill him. Steel clatters as the crowd surges forward, accompanied by the heavy sound of the downpour. A sharp sound cuts through the rain as the first strike lands. The mob screams to kill him, but their voices are drowned out by the spray of blood. Blades clash and bone snaps under the weight of the swordsman's relentless advance. He moves like a phantom through the downpour, leaving a trail of fallen men in his wake. The ground turns slick with a mixture of rainwater and red as the sounds of tearing flesh fill the air. A massive brute lunges from the rear, roaring that he finally has the bastard trapped. Heavy impacts shake the air as the swordsman pivots with impossible speed. A blinding flash erupts, a horizontal line of light cleaving through the darkness. The sound of a clean cut rings out, followed by a sudden, heavy silence. Stunned and broken, the attacker gasps, wondering how he could have been struck even from behind. Life fades from his eyes before he hits the mud. Rain continues to pour, washing the blood from the swordsman's cold, steady eye. Lightning flashes, illuminating the path toward the inner sanctum. There, an old man sits in the shadows, waiting. The swordsman stops, his silhouette framed by the flickering light of the sky. The old man asks if this is indeed the nameless swordsman standing before him. Silence is the only initial response. With a mocking sneer, the elder questions why a swordsman of justice would hide his face so thoroughly. The traveler bluntly states that he is not a man of justice. Confused, the old man demands to know why he hunts the unorthodox faction if he lacks righteousness. The swordsman clarifies that he is not a righteous warrior. The elder laughs, accusing him of deceiving the world. Coldly, the swordsman retorts that he has deceived no one. People simply chose to believe what they desired. The old man finds the revelation fascinating. He grips his weapon, declaring that even if he must cross the river of the dead this day, he will do so without regrets. He challenges the intruder to come forward. Whether the man is truly the nameless swordsman or something else, his intent to kill remains the same. Both warriors tense, their blades ready to decide the fate of the Black Death sect. The air grows heavy with the promise of a final lethal exchange. A violent explosion of force rocks the courtyard. Red light flares from the swordsman's mask as he delivers a finishing blow. The sound of steel meeting flesh rings through the rain. He steps away, his boots splashing in the red-stained puddles. A blood-slicked blade drips as he sheathes it, leaving the gate of the sect behind. Lightning tears through the clouds once more, casting a harsh white light over the carnage. The mission is complete, and the storm claims the rest. Underneath the straw hat, a young man with wild dark hair is revealed. Cherry blossoms drifted through the heavy air, settling softly into a pool of thickening blood. The swordsman let out a weary breath as he surveyed the devastation, quietly wondering whether this ruined landscape could truly be the Manhwa sect he had once known. His boots clicked against the blood-slicked stone as he stepped over the fallen, taking in the aftermath of a massacre that defied belief. The distant sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence. Monks and warriors from the region's most revered martial sects emerged onto the mountain, their faces twisting in horror at the sight of the blood-drenched grounds. One man cried out in anguish, invoking Amitabha and condemning the slaughter as the work of a demon. Before they could fully process the scene, a dying plum blossom swordsman managed to gasp a final warning. The entire Manhwa sect had been annihilated. With his last breath, he revealed the chilling truth that a single man had been responsible for the carnage. Fury instantly ignited among the reinforcements. They demanded their ranks close in, cursing the hidden swordsman and ordering him to reveal himself. Standing before the combined forces of Shaolin, Wudang, Qingcheng, and Namgung, the intruder merely remarked on the impressive turnout. When the warriors demanded an explanation for the massacre, he calmly stated that he had come because he heard Manhwa was the strongest sect in the land. Since the reality had failed to match the legend, he concluded that rumors were fundamentally unreliable. To drive his point home, he casually tossed the severed head of the Manhwa sect leader aside, as though it were common refuse. He then mocked their reliance on numbers, suggesting that arriving in a pack must mean they possessed greater strength than the sect he had just dismantled. Enraged, the assembled warriors swore to avenge Manhwa and bring peace to its fallen souls. Unfazed by their glowing blades and coordinated charge, the swordsmen found the entire situation quietly entertaining. Without warning, the world flickered and dissolved into a cascade of digital static. The martial artist was suddenly revealed to be a young man sitting in a cramped, dimly lit room, pulling a high-tech virtual reality headset from his face. He exhaled slowly, quietly considering whether a coordinated assault from so many players would still prove too difficult to overcome. He had been playing Murim Online, a notoriously brutal VR game, celebrated for its unflinching violence and dismemberment mechanics. Despite widespread complaints and calls for its shutdown, the young man acknowledged that nothing else on the market could replicate its raw intensity. Deciding that a more subtle approach would be necessary for his next session, he turned his attention to a television screen. A breaking news report announced the disappearance of Mr. Mo, a high-ranking executive at Dado Corporation. The young man mused that assassination might be a more suitable path forward. From the shadows of the apartment, a muffled cry for help broke the silence. Remembering his prisoner, he approached a bound and trembling man huddled in the corner. The captive desperately begged for his life, to which the young man coldly asked whether the man truly expected anyone to come to his rescue. Stammering, the prisoner insisted he had been kidnapped without cause and maintained his innocence. His voice cracked as his eyes fell to the floor, where photographs documenting his own horrific crimes lay scattered in the dim light. Trembling, he demanded to know how his captor had obtained such damning evidence. Gripping a heavy hammer, the young man replied that if the man were truly innocent, he never would have been targeted in the first place. The captive wailed, claiming he was repenting and begging for mercy, but his captor found the plea utterly exhausting. He dryly noted that the phrase "spare me" had grown tiresome, no matter who uttered it. Fear quickly curdled into desperate rage. The captive spat out vicious insults. He suddenly slammed into our boy, knocking him backward. In that instant, the captive broke free from his restraints and grabbed the hammer, raising it to strike. As he swung, our boy narrowly dodged the attack and countered with a heavy blow. A sickening thud echoed through the room as the young man struck. The struggle was brief and brutal, ending with the captive collapsed and broken on the floor. As the man crawled away, sobbing that he did not want to die, his captor watched with detached calm. He explained that most humans were simple herbivores, while a predatory minority existed to hunt and devour the weak, but he clarified that he was neither. He was the one who hunted those very predators. He was a hunter. The door suddenly burst open as police officers flooded the cramped space, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They shouted commands to freeze, while a lead detective identified the young man as Dong Bongsu and formally placed him under arrest for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and murder. Dong quietly wondered how law enforcement had tracked him down. The detective fired a warning shot, the deafening crack of the live round echoing off the walls as he ordered the suspect to stand down. Surveying the scene, Dong couldn't help but notice how strikingly similar the moment felt to his VR encounters. When our boy coldly asked the detective if he knew that this man had murdered several women, Dong pointed to the captive and detailed how the man had tortured, photographed, and killed his victims. He argued that the room was filled with murderers, animals that preyed on ordinary people, and insisted he was merely the hunter who preyed on them. He calmly told the detective that he was aiming at the wrong man. Unmoved, the detective lit a cigarette, his eyes scanning the carnage. He saw no vigilante or hero in the room, only a psychopathic killer who kidnapped and executed his victims in the dark. After hearing that, our boy started laughing. Then, without hesitation, he swung his hammer. He had no intention of letting that man live. The officer shouted for him to stop, but it was already too late. In that same instant, the officer fired. In the final fraction of a second before dying, our boy made one last wish to be reborn in a Murim world overflowing with beasts, where he could kill without mercy. And then, he suddenly jolted awake. Disbelief washed over him as he questioned how he could possibly still be drawing breath after taking a lethal round. He soon discovered he was not alone. An elderly man stood directly over him, his face etched with profound shock. The old man muttered under his breath, admitting that he had been absolutely certain the boy had perished, yet here he lay, defying the finality of his injuries. The man looming above him, he snarled at the boy, bitterly complaining about the exhausting effort it had taken to drag his lifeless body all the way from the marketplace. The atmosphere grew thick with hostility as Ma Chill leaned closer, his fist tightening while he questioned whether he should simply finish the job and ensure the boy stayed dead. After a final disgusted click of his tongue, The elder promised that tomorrow would bring a proper reckoning. Anger surged within him, and he grabbed a rock, ready to kill the man. But the moment he stood up, a sharp wave of pain and agony shot through his body, forcing him to collapse back onto the ground. When he finally managed to look down at his own hands, a jolt of horror struck him. He was staring at a skeletal, heavily scarred, and severely emaciated body that clearly did not belong to him. As he took in the unfamiliar wounds and the wrecked state of his new vessel, he quietly wondered what kind of existence could reduce a person to such ruin. Despite the overwhelming pain, a sharp realization slowly dawned as he absorbed the traditional architecture and the heavy, archaic atmosphere of his surroundings. He suddenly knew exactly where he had landed. This world was the Murim. A wave of grim satisfaction washed over him as he understood that his dying wish had been granted in full. He was no longer a prisoner bound by modern justice. He had been reborn as an apex predator in a land governed by martial legends. The narrative quickly shifted to the damp interior of a stable, where the heavy, earthy scent of hay and livestock filled the cramped space. Machil stepped into the stall, sharply addressing the boy by the name Sosam. He ordered him to rise and follow immediately, insisting there was labor that demanded his attention. Wrinkling his nose in disgust, Machil complained about the overwhelming stench of horse manure. Sosam's voice emerged as a hesitant, fractured stutter as he tried to explain that he had not yet finished cleaning the stalls. His weak protest was met with instant violence. As Macho grabbed him, squeezing his face, he reminded him that the Danri clan only provided him with shelter and food out of sheer pity. He viciously emphasized that a stuttering orphan like Sosam should never forget his designated place, making it brutally clear that he was nothing more than a slave to be used. They soon moved out into a sun-baked courtyard dominated by a massive, rusting mountain of discarded weapons. An older laborer working nearby looked up in surprise, noting that Dong-O had arrived instead of their usual supervisor. He asked where Machil had gone, and Dong-O casually explained that Machil had already headed to the Phoenix Tavern with Eng, likely several drinks deep into his afternoon. The old man let out a weary sigh, remarking that moving such an enormous pile of steel would be nearly impossible for just two people. Dong-O let out a cruel laugh, gesturing dismissively toward the battered boy standing at his side. He declared that they already had a perfectly serviceable beast of burden ready to handle the heavy lifting, to make his intentions unmistakable. He delivered a brutal kick directly into Sosam's ribs, barking an order for him to stand up and begin moving the weapons without delay. Remembering his own plans to drink at the Phoenix Tavern, Dong-O quickly decided to abandon the work altogether. He mockingly instructed his so-called younger brother Sosam to work diligently, leaving him alone with the crushing weight of the steel mountain. The old man looked at Sosam, then turned away with a hint of pity. Sosam walked on, struggling as he carried a heavy load of weapons. Midway, the worn-out bag tore apart, and the weapons scattered across the ground. Exhausted, he slowly gathered them again, and dragged the torn bag along until he finally reached his destination. The old man told him he had done well, but he should rest. He looked like he was on the verge of death. Sosam simply replied that he was fine and staggered away. As he walked, barely able to stand, a thought crept into his mind. Did he really want to keep living like an insect? Just then, he bumped into someone. The man immediately grew irritated. Sosam tried to apologize, but before he could finish, a punch landed, then another, and another. The man began beating him without restraint. As Sosam endured the blows, his thoughts drifted. When did it all go wrong? Was it when his family died in a typhoon, leaving him as the sole survivor? Or when he knocked on the Danri family's gate, begging just to stay alive? Or was it simply the moment he was born into a world like this? The beating didn't stop. And in the end, that was how Sosam died. Now, back to our main character. He slowly opened his eyes and forced himself to stand, his body screaming in pain. Fragments of memory flooded his mind, the name of this body's previous owner, Sosam. He looked around and recognized the place from those memories. The stable, Sosam had been beaten to death, and now our boy had taken his place. Suddenly, a strange window appeared before him. A system, it displayed his stats, most of them filled with question marks, and welcomed him to this new world. The scene shifts. Macho walks in, carrying food, grumbling under his breath. He complains about how he's stuck doing this annoying task, thinking Sosam should have just gone straight back to the stables after work, instead of running into Peng Dorang, a man notorious for his foul temper. Just in case things escalated, Dong-O had even been called over. Macho clicks his tongue in irritation. Why does someone like him, Ma Chil, have to deal with a pathetic worm like Sosam? For a moment, a darker thought crosses his mind. Should he just kill him for real? But he quickly dismisses it, too risky. If he got caught, his own neck would be the first on the chopping block. With that, he enters the stable, shouting in annoyance. He snaps at our boy, asking why he's still alive and causing trouble. Then he threw the bowl of food at him before turning around and walking off. Our boy thinks to himself that 2 weeks have passed since he arrived in this world. During that fortnight, he had pieced together the nature of his surroundings through Ma Chil's careless remarks and his own quiet observations. Though the locals wrote using Chinese characters, So-Sam quickly realized this was not the historical China he knew. The undeniable proof lay in the martial arts themselves. Impossible techniques that defied reality, allowing warriors to glide through the air and strike faster than the human eye could follow. It mirrored the virtual world of Murim Online almost perfectly, complete with a floating status interface visible only to him. Yet the line between simulation and reality had blurred completely. Every person breathed with genuine emotion and moved with unmistakable vitality. He found himself quietly questioning whether he had truly been reborn as a living man, or if he remained merely a player trapped inside a grander, unseen design. The heavy thud of approaching footsteps shattered his reverie as Guak Dong-o loomed in the doorway. The older brother sneered, bitterly remarking that So-Sam seemed to be enjoying a comfortable rest, while he himself had endured a severe beating over the younger boy's incompetence. Our boy didn't say a word. He simply stood up, grabbed his bowl, and began gulping down the food. Guak Dong-o grew furious, shouting at him and asking if he wanted to die. In the next instant, our boy slammed the bowl onto the table, shattering it into pieces. Without hesitation, he picked up a sharp shard and lunged forward, slicing Guak's neck open. Calmly, he told him that the weak boy he once knew had died long ago. Guak tried to fight back, but it was useless. Our boy kept stabbing him again and again, blood splashing everywhere, until Guak finally collapsed. After killing him, our boy looked up. Player human, none of that matters now. Just as he had thought this place was reality, and the only law here was one he had already sensed from Ma Chill. The weak are prey to the strong. In a world like this, he didn't need to hide anymore. He could hunt to his heart's content, freely without restraint, and once his body fully recovered, he would continue the hunt. After that, we see him sitting beside Guak's corpse, lost in thought. Normally, someone like Guak wouldn't even be worth hunting. But there was something he wanted to confirm. He called out his inventory. As he examined it, he realized it was different from a game. Instead of being divided into slots, it was one vast open space. When he tried to touch it, his hand passed right through. Still, he could feel it. The storage was enormous, testing the mechanics. He extended a hand toward the body and issued a silent command to store it. The air shimmered with an unseen force that instantly wrapped around the remains. In the blink of an eye, the massive weight vanished, leaving the floor completely clean of any grisly evidence. He recognized the immense tactical value of such a power and filed it away for future use. A new question immediately surfaced. Could living beings be stored within that space? And if so, would they survive the void? He resolved to conduct further experiments before drawing any conclusions. Later that day, So-Sam stood with a broom in hand, deliberately slouching his posture to maintain his carefully crafted disguise. A passing laborer sneered at him, mocking his supposed idiocy and noting how he had apparently lost his ability to speak entirely. So-Sam responded with a series of hollow, unintelligible grunts, perfectly embodying the role of a broken servant. The man warned him not to slack off and ordered him to take a horse out for a walk, muttering bitterly about the frustration of dealing with someone who couldn't communicate. As So-Sam led the horse through the crowded street, he glanced around the busy market. Suddenly, he heard the laughter of children from a nearby corner. One of them threw a stone that struck his head, drawing blood. They began mocking him, calling him stupid, someone who couldn't even speak properly, but their laughter quickly faded. Our boy slowly turned and stared at them, his gaze cold and intense. The children shivered under it. Then, just as suddenly, he started laughing, softly, while gently petting his horse and continuing on his way. The children, emboldened again, resumed their taunts and threw more stones at him. This time it truly angered him. And then, the scene shifts. Ma Chill grumbled bitterly about his lowly station as a mere weapon cleaner, his thoughts drifting to Guak Dong-o, who had vanished without a trace. He quietly wondered whether the man had finally perished in some forgotten ditch. His musings were abruptly interrupted when So-Sam emerged from a nearby building, startling the older man into demanding to know why the youth had left that specific location. Ma Chill stared in stunned silence, quickly realizing the boy had actually completed his assigned labor. Internally, he noted a profound shift in So-Sam's demeanor, following his recent brush with death. The youth now worked with a quiet, terrifying diligence, completing tasks without a single prompt. Ma Chill found himself quietly questioning whether the boy had finally matured into a proper human being. When So-Sam silently extended a heavy pouch toward him, Ma Chill erupted into loud praise, congratulating the youth for finally understanding how the world operated and warning him to maintain this new attitude moving forward. From the dim corner of the armory, So-Sam watched the exchange with a cold, detached gaze. He understood exactly what Ma Chill was carrying, not just coin, but his own ticket to the afterlife. Completely oblivious to the shadow closing in, Ma Chill decided that a full wallet deserved a change of pace. Abandoning his usual companion, Aang Eng, he set his sights on Chozian, a notorious tavern vixen. He marched straight into the Phoenix Tavern, loudly insisting that the attendant bring the woman to his table without delay. The attendant initially hesitated at the name, but the heavy clink of gold instantly silenced his reservations. Greed flashing across his face, he promptly directed Machil to a private room at the end of the second floor, assuring him the woman would arrive shortly. Left alone in the dimly lit space, Machil waited until the door finally creaked open. Chozian stepped inside, her presence instantly commanding the room. Machil found himself completely captivated, silently admitting that his usual favorite paled in comparison to the woman standing before him. Clearing his throat, Machil gestured for her to sit and pour his drink, his voice thickening with desire as he marveled at her delicate hands and urged her to draw closer. Unseen in the shadows, a narrow crack in the wooden partition framed a single, unblinking red eye. The predator waited in absolute silence, tracking every movement Machil made with cold, calculating malice. Outside, the tavern attendant watched Machil disappear upstairs, clicking his tongue in quiet disapproval at the obvious age gap. Yet his moral hesitation quickly dissolved beneath the weight of the coins in his palm. He rationalized that money itself carried no sin, regardless of its source. His quiet celebration was abruptly shattered when a dark silhouette materialized in the doorway, casting a long, thin shadow across the floor. Squinting against the dying light, the attendant recognized the figure. He called out the boy's name, openly questioning why Sosam would venture into such a place. The attendant's confusion quickly hardened into aggression as he mocked the mute boy, demanding whether he even understood where he stood and warning him to leave immediately before the situation escalated. Sosam refused to retreat. Instead, he slowly extended a small pouch of his own. His fractured stutter broke the heavy silence as he struggled to form the name Aang Aang, silently offering the bribe to secure his entry. The attendant's hostility vanished the instant he felt the familiar weight of gold. Peering inside, his eyes widened at the gleaming coins, and a wide, toothy grin instantly replaced his scowl. He promptly pocketed the payment, instructing Sosam to wait in the second room from the end on the second floor, while promising to send Aang his way without delay. Sosam slipped into the crimson-lit corridors of the tavern, his footsteps completely silent as he navigated toward his destination. He moved with the cold, methodical precision of a hunter, fully preparing to execute his long-planned strike. Inside the private room, Machil loudly boasted about his own vitality, completely unaware of the shadow rising behind him. In a single fluid motion, the white bandage looped around his throat. His boast instantly fractured into a desperate, choking gasp. He thrashed violently, his muscles straining as the ligature tightened mercilessly. A guttural cry for help escaped his lips, only to die before it could ever reach the door. Machil clawed frantically at the fabric, his face rapidly darkening to a bruised purple. Through choked wheezes, he demanded to know what kind of monster would dare strike him down. His attacker offered no response. The pressure only increased, the bandages biting deep into his flesh as the room blurred into a frenzy of muffled violence. Sam's red eye, wide and utterly unblinking, stared down at his victim. The sound of Machil's final wet gasp echoed through the cramped space as his strength completely failed. His hands fell away from the cloth, and the life drained from his eyes while the predator's grip remained unyielding until the work was entirely finished. Sam's attention slowly shifted. Nearby, Chozian lay motionless on the bed, her eyes closed and completely oblivious to the murder that had just unfolded mere feet away. Sam turned toward her, his silhouette stark against the room's warm glow. He slowly knelt beside the bed, his bandaged hand reaching out as he fixed his gaze upon the sleeping girl, his gaze cold and analytical as he categorized her as little more than a defenseless herbivore. Recognizing her complete lack of will or strength to survive in such a brutal realm, he deliberately turned his back on her and moved toward the center of the dimly lit wooden chamber. Extending a bandaged hand toward the darkened corner, he silently commanded the system to store the heavy burden within his inventory. A brilliant blue radiance erupted from his palm, digitizing the surrounding space as he quietly reflected on his foresight in mastering the mechanic. He acknowledged that such spatial manipulation would prove invaluable for future hunts, allowing him to traverse the martial world unencumbered by evidence or physical weight. Immediately afterward, a shimmering interface materialized before his eyes. The display cataloged categories for offensive and defensive Mugong, alongside quests, skills, equipment, and items. More importantly, it confirmed his darkest suspicions. The act of taking a life had successfully granted him experience points. He realized that in this unforgiving reality, the life force of others directly translated into tangible progression. Murder was no longer merely an act of violence. It was the essential fuel required for his ascension. The brutal arithmetic of this new existence settled into his mind with chilling clarity. He stretched his bandaged arms wide, fully embracing the bloody promise of his new reality as a low, satisfied hum vibrated in the quiet room. Framing the grisly scene with his fingers as though composing a cinematic shot, Sam lamented the absence of a camera to preserve the moment. The narrative abruptly shifted to the hallway outside, where Guak Dongo stood guard with his arms crossed, his posture radiating impatience. When a woman approached, he immediately demanded to know whether the others were still inside, barking her name, Inging, and questioning the reason for her delay. He ordered her to enter the room without further hesitation, pointing out that even though the customer was mute, he had still paid his dues. Grumbling under his breath, Guak wondered aloud if Machil and the girl were attempting to conceive a child, given the excessive time they had taken. Clearing his throat, he raised a heavy fist and pounded against the wooden door. He called out to Machil and insisted that far too much time had passed for them to remain inside. Only absolute silence answered his demands. Realizing they were being deliberately ignored, Guak's irritation flared and he prepared to force his way inside. Before he could act, a piercing scream from Chozin shattered the hallway's quiet. Guak lunged forward and violently threw the door open, only to find the girl cowering against the far wall, trembling with sheer terror as she stared at something just out of view. Guak's eyes widened in pure, uncomprehending shock. The weight of the tragedy immediately settled over the Danri clan, silently marking the beginning of a dark, inexplicable era across the province of Anhui. The narrative shifts to the vast geography of Anhui. In the north flows the Huai River, while the Yangtze River cuts through the center, forming an expansive plain. Since ancient times, this land has been known for its rich, fertile soil and its network of lakes and rivers, allowing commerce and trade to flourish. But where wealth gathers, trouble follows. Bandits begin to stir in the tall grass, and villains from the unorthodox faction run rampant, forcing many to rise against them. In response, numerous clans and sects devoted to upholding the laws of the Murim are established in Anhui. Among them, two stand out: the Namgung clan, one of the 5 great clans of the Central Plains and the most powerful sect in Anhui, and the Danri clan. Though the Danri clan cannot rival Namgung in strength, it possesses its own specialized forces, the Cross Heaven Sword Division, and its intelligence and enforcement unit, the Black Crow Squad. Thanks to them, the clan's reputation has spread throughout Anhui. In particular, the Black Crow Squad's information-gathering ability is so formidable that even the Beggar sect, renowned for its intelligence network, reluctantly concedes second place, at least within Anhui. But recently, even they have been struggling, a new case. The sun shines over the ornate rooftops of the Black Crow Squad's headquarters. Squad leader Gidai Ho studies the reports of yet another suicide, calling it a plague. Over the past few months, nearly 100 people have taken their own lives. Suicides were not unheard of, but never at this scale. Usually 1 or 2 a month, never this many. Something is wrong. What's even stranger is how perfect every case appears. The evidence, the circumstances, everything points cleanly to suicide. Too cleanly. Gidai Ho questions whether such perfection is even possible. He asks who the first victim was. The subordinate answers, an armory artisan from the clan, Machil. Surprised, Gidai asks if he means the Danri clan. Upon confirmation, he immediately asks where Machil died. At the Phoenix Tavern, the subordinate replies. Without hesitation, Gidai decides to go. The subordinate is taken aback, suggesting there's no need for the squad leader to go personally. But Gidai refuses. He has to see it with his own eyes. They arrive at the large, multi-storied tavern where common folk gather. Inside, Gidai asks if they've reached the room. The subordinate confirms it, explaining that he and Chozin found Machil hanging from the rafters here. Jideo scans the wooden walls, suspicion in his eyes. If this so-called suicide plague is actually a string of murders, then how did the killer enter this room? He has already searched every corner. There is no visible way in or out, which leaves only one possibility. He steps closer to the wall, examining the wooden planks, his gaze narrowing at the seams. If these logs were removed, someone could pass through. But there's a problem. These logs have never been disturbed. He asks if there's any way to remove them without dismantling the structure. The subordinate shakes his head, explaining that the logs are fixed into grooves between the ceiling and floor beams. Removing them would require tearing apart the entire frame. So the question remains, was it really suicide? Gidaheo asks if anyone occupied the room next door at the time of Machil's death. The subordinate recalls that another guest had checked in around the same time. When asked who it was, he answers, Sosam of the Danri clan. A translucent blue interface hovered beside Sosam. He quietly noted that the recent kill had yielded a significantly higher experience reward than his previous targets. This discrepancy confirmed that his latest victim had been a trained martial artist, leading him to conclude that hunting stronger opponents was the most efficient path to rapid advancement. His calculations were abruptly interrupted by a group of street thugs who emerged from the shadows, sneering at his presence. They mockingly remarked on his improved appearance while demanding that he show proper deference to his elders. When he offered no response, they grew increasingly agitated, questioning whether he truly dared to ignore them entirely. Sosam observed them with cold detachment, quietly wondering if the original host of this body had truly spent his entire life submitting to such pathetic individuals. Oblivious to the predator standing before them, the thugs proposed a private confrontation and began to close in, trapping him against the alley wall. He briefly weighed the possibility of a total massacre, calculating whether he could conceal their bodies within his inventory and stage the scene as a mass suicide. He considered the logistics of relocating the remains to avoid suspicion, but ultimately determined that the risk of creating a public disturbance outweighed the minimal experience they would provide. He decided to endure a temporary beating and eliminate them at a more strategically advantageous moment. Before the confrontation could escalate, a man named Jang Ho arrived, sharply ordering the thugs to stand down. He approached with deliberate steps, openly criticizing his subordinates for their lack of subtlety in handling the situation. Completely ignoring the tension, Jang Ho directed his full attention to the horse. He praised the animal's quality, noting that the leader of the Dark Society harbored an absolute obsession with fine steeds. He openly stated his intention to present the horse as a gift to his superior, making it abundantly clear that he planned to take the animal and eliminate its owner to secure it. When Jang Ho demanded So-Sam's response, his smile carried an unmistakable undercurrent of lethal intent. So-Sam immediately recognized that the horse had been the true objective all along, and that Django had fatally misjudged his target. Noticing the boy's continued silence, Jang Ho issued a sharp warning that he would not repeat himself. Breaking his long-held mute facade, So-Sam finally spoke, his voice steady as he instructed the man to simply kill him rather than waste time with unnecessary questions. The thugs froze in shock, having firmly believed their victim was incapable of speech. The atmosphere in the alley instantly shifted from a petty robbery into a lethal standoff. So-Sam activated his inventory system, triggering a sudden eruption of blinding light and raw power. A brilliant flash consumed the narrow space between them as a weapon materialized from the void. A piercing scream of agony immediately tore through the air, marking the instantaneous beginning of a brutal exchange. Jang Ho collapsed to the ground, his eyes wide with utter disbelief as he gasped out a final, fragmented question regarding how such a reversal could possibly occur. Chains of dark energy erupted from the center of the lingering glow, causing the remaining thugs to shriek in pure terror. A system notification flickered into existence, formally congratulating So-Sam on his advancement. The surviving thugs watched in absolute horror as the boy they had routinely bullied transformed into an unrecognizable force of nature. Their terror quickly spiraled into hysteria as they branded So-Sam a demon. They screamed contradictory orders, demanding that everyone flee while simultaneously shouting for his immediate death. They urged each other to kill the monster before them, their voices fracturing under the weight of a fear that completely overrode their reasoning. The narrow passage, previously a site of petty extortion, instantly transformed into a slaughterhouse. The massacre began without hesitation as So-Sam moved with unnatural surgical precision. The thugs found themselves completely unable to comprehend the entity hunting them, their initial bravado dissolving into desperate, futile pleas for mercy. One man begged for his life, but his cries were met with absolute indifference. A dying thug slumped against a stack of wooden crates, his mind struggling to process the impossibility of his situation. He could not reconcile the fact that he was meeting his end at the hands of someone he had consistently dismissed as a complete loser. Our boy grabbed him and began dragging him. Moments later, the man suddenly opened his eyes and screamed, labeling his captor a demon as he scrambled backward. The nameless swordsman simply looked down, his expression unreadable, quietly noting that the man was finally awake. He stepped closer. A blade flashed in the dim light as the swordsman pressed a knife against the man's throat. He demanded to know the identity of the arrogant fool who had died first. Trembling, the captive stammered out the name Jang Ho. The swordsman gave a slow nod, his mind immediately recalling Jang Ho's dying words regarding something called the Black. Panicking, the prisoner clarified that it referred to the Black Society, explaining that they were one of the notorious wicked sects that controlled the back alleys of Bongyang. He added that Jang Ho had served as an executive within their ranks. The swordsman silently processed the title, remembering that Jang Ho had indeed mentioned a leader before his death. The captive quickly revealed that the organization was commanded by Bang Po Yeom, and confessed that it was Bang Po Yeom himself who had ordered Jang Ho to assassinate Lord So-Sam and steal his prized horse. He commanded the prisoner to disclose every detail he possessed about these criminal factions, offering a cold bargain. If the intelligence proved valuable, he might allow the man to live. Desperation seized the captive, whose voice cracked as he begged to know if survival was genuinely possible. Instead of answering with words, the swordsman let the system respond. A faint blue light flickered in the corridor as he activated his inventory function, and the prisoner vanished instantly into the spatial void. Wiping the fresh blood from his face, the nameless swordsman exhaled slowly, quietly wondering whether he had finally eliminated every remaining witness. Crucial truths had emerged that day. He reflected on the nature of the wicked sects and realized they represented the perfect hunting ground. He had been searching for leveling targets that existed in the dangerous space between ordinary civilians and trained martial artists, and these criminal organizations fit the criteria flawlessly. His focus sharpened completely. From that moment forward, he would begin systematically preparing to hunt them down. As if on cue, a system notification confirmed his advancement. The level-up effect washed over him instantly, and he immediately noticed that every lingering injury had been erased. The deep scars on his hands and the various wounds across his body vanished without a trace. He quietly pondered the limits of this miracle, wondering if the system could even regenerate a damaged heart or brain. This knowledge granted him a dangerous tactical advantage. He realized that if he could survive long enough to approach the next threshold, he could afford to take severe risks in combat. Yet, he also recognized a significant flaw. The brilliant radiance that had filled the alley during his previous level up was far too conspicuous, acting as a beacon that would inevitably draw unwanted attention. He understood that concealing this phenomenon was absolutely necessary for his survival. The same strict secrecy applied to his inventory. Using it to dispose of victims was a secret he could never allow to surface. To operate as a hidden predator among his prey, he had to maintain the flawless facade of an ordinary man. He firmly believed that true mastery of the hunt required absolute camouflage. When a predator became indistinguishable from the crowd, that was the moment he became truly unstoppable. He vowed to manage his progression with extreme caution. Moving forward, he would only allow himself to level up once a hunt was completely finished or when he was entirely isolated with his next target. He needed to accumulate strength quickly without exposing his true capabilities. The path forward was unequivocal. He had to hunt relentlessly, seeking out increasingly powerful beasts to fuel his ascent. Moments later, a man grabbed the MC's shoulder and called out to him, asking if he was the one who killed Ma Chill. Before the MC could respond, the man activated his ability. Earlier, when our boy was alone, his system displayed a message. A critical error had occurred. It warned that proceeding further would be more difficult, but still possible. He assumed the error appeared after he leveled up, which made sense, since he wasn't supposed to exist in this world to begin with. The system window lingered beside him, but he dismissed the notification, deciding there was no point dwelling on it now. Navigating past the quest and gear tabs, he selected the skills menu. 4 basic passive techniques appeared: slash, thrust, block, and strike, each registered at level 1 with 0% action bonuses. However, the descriptions were fundamentally inverted. He immediately recognized these as the standard starter skills granted during character creation in Murim Online, but one entry froze his attention completely. Spirit Eye possessed a permanence of 0% and lacked any accompanying description, marking it as a clear anomaly outside the game's standard framework. Before he could investigate further, a sharp chime echoed through the room. A warning window materialized with a chilling directive. An enemy at least 10 levels higher had entered a 20-meter radius. An immediate countdown initiated, ticking down from 19. He recognized the mechanic instantly, realizing the skill functioned as a proximity-based early warning system. The numbers continued their relentless descent. He reasoned that the approaching figure was highly unlikely to be a hostile intruder, as few would dare breach the Danri clan estate, and certainly not with such slow, deliberate footsteps. The counter dropped to 11, then 10. By the time the display reached 9, he was entirely certain the visitor belonged within these walls. The individual had to be a high-ranking master from inside the clan. Though he had never experienced a 10-level gap firsthand, he understood its crushing weight. Reaching level 2 had required near-death exertion, making the disparity between him and this newcomer astronomically vast. A sharp sliding sound echoed as the door parted. The counter struck 1. Jang Ho, the hall leader, stood in the threshold. His sharp goatee and stern eyes immediately commanded the space, directly asking whether the boy standing before him was truly Sosam. Before any response could be formed, a massive, calloused hand clamped down on Sosam's shoulder. The grip was immovable, forcing him to look upward into eyes that reflected terrifying, disciplined power. Jang Ho's voice remained cold and measured as he inquired whether Sosam was responsible for Ma Chill's death. He trembled visibly under the hall leader's intense scrutiny, perfectly selling the image of a broken, frightened child. A sharp hiss cut through the silence as crackling blue energy erupted from Jang Ho's palm. The chi surged directly into Sosam's body, illuminating his skeletal structure in a ghostly, electric radiance. It was a violent, invasive diagnostic technique designed to trace internal pathways. The energy spiraled through his heart and limbs, aggressively searching for any hidden cultivation or dormant martial foundations. The sheer force of the internal examination forced a pained gasp from Sosam as the technique reached its peak intensity. The blue light abruptly dissipated as Jang Ho withdrew his hand. Jang Ho observed him with a neutral expression, his initial curiosity thoroughly satisfied. Without another word, he turned his back on the trembling boy and simply ordered his subordinate that it was time to depart. The bearded attendant appeared momentarily confused, questioning why they were leaving without conducting a formal interrogation. He quickly recovered, however, and responded with a respectful affirmation as they turned toward the exit. Outside in the courtyard, the subordinate finally voiced his lingering doubts. He asked why the hall leader had abandoned the investigation so abruptly, openly questioning whether Jang Ho harbored any remaining suspicion toward the boy. Jang Ho admitted that he had indeed been highly suspicious. He explained that he had forced his chi into the boy's meridians to read his internal pulse, noting that even the most rudimentary martial training would have left a detectable residue. When the subordinate asked what the scan revealed, Jang Ho confirmed that So-Sam was completely empty, lacking even a single trace of internal energy. He concluded definitively that the boy was nothing more than an ordinary civilian, who had never touched martial arts in his life. Jang Ho's thoughts drifted to the recent plague of mass suicides that had terrorized Bongyang. He quietly questioned how many more lives such a curse would claim before it finally burned itself out. Rain drummed relentlessly against the tiled rooftops, casting pale, shifting reflections under a heavily clouded moon. Inside a nearby tavern, one man downed his drink in a single heavy gulp, slamming the wooden cup against the table with a satisfied grunt. His companion leaned in, quietly asking if he had caught the latest rumors circulating through the city. The first man confirmed that he had, noting that the nameless hero had become the sole subject of conversation across every district. His friend immediately hissed for silence, insisting that the warrior deserved the formal title of Lord Nameless Hero, especially since he was currently occupied with systematically dismantling the wicked sects. The companion urged him to lower his voice, fearing they might be overheard, but the drunkard defiantly refused to be cowed. He boasted loudly that half of the region's most arrogant criminal organizations, including the White Tiger Hall and the Red Wolf clan, had already been completely decimated. Laughter erupted from the man as he openly dismissed any lingering fear regarding the Black Society, declaring that their destruction was inevitable because the nameless hero would soon crush them, without mercy. In the far corner of the room, a dark, hooded figure quietly rose from the shadows, as the nameless swordsman exited the tavern, vanishing seamlessly into the torrential downpour. Above, the sky fractured with a brilliant flash of lightning, followed by a low roll of thunder that seemed to announce the arrival of a true psychopath within the martial world. At the imposing gates of the Black Society compound, a lone guard had begun to drift into slumber, his soft snores barely audible over the relentless rain. A sharp strike from his partner jolted him awake, immediately followed by a harsh demand questioning whether he truly believed sleeping on duty was acceptable under the circumstances. The startled guard stammered a quick apology, but his superior quickly cut him off, ordering him to compose himself and reminding him that the nameless hero was currently on a bloody rampage. The guard explained that 3 rival sects had already been completely wiped out, leaving their organization as the final remaining target. As the superior began to reprimand him for losing focus again, a sudden wet spray of crimson erupted into the night air. The man stood completely frozen, his mind struggling to process why his companion had instantly collapsed. Terror instantly seized the surviving guard as the horrifying truth dawned on him. Before he could fully form the thought, a blade whistled through the storm, followed by the heavy, final thud of a body striking the mud. Beneath the prominent sign of the Black Society, severed heads began tumbling down the stone steps, like discarded stones. The nameless swordsman placed both hands against the massive wooden doors, forcing them apart with a low, grinding creak. He stepped into the courtyard as the wind whistled sharply through the newly opened gap. Arrows immediately hissed through the darkness, but the intruder moved with unnatural, blurring speed, effortlessly evading the volley. Standing before a heavily armed formation, a commander of the Black Society called out into the rain, stating that he had anticipated the warrior's arrival. He openly mocked the intruder, dismissing him as a mere nameless rat. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the grim tableau, revealing a lone swordsman standing against an unbroken wall of steel and hostility. A deafening roar filled the courtyard as the commander ordered his entire force to kill the bastard on sight. The army surged forward in a unified charge, weapons raised for a crushing strike. In response, the nameless swordsman unleashed a devastating technique, sweeping through the entire vanguard with a single horizontal arc of crimson energy. The front line was instantly erased from existence. Blood sprayed across the courtyard stones as the soldiers' battle cries were abruptly silenced mid-breath. The swordsman dissolved into a blur of lethal motion, carving through the remaining horde until nothing but the steady drumming of the rain and the faint sounds of the dying remained. Frustration boiled over among the attackers, with one cursing their predicament, while another screamed his determination to claim the intruder's head. Steel bit into flesh with a sickening impact, followed by the wet spray of blood and the agonized cries of men collapsing into the mire. The sharp clash of wood and the heavy thud of falling bodies filled the air as the slaughter continued unabated. Mid-stride, his advance was abruptly halted. Shock crossed an attacker's face as he realized the target was finally bound. A voice rang out, branding the swordsman a coward for his elusive tactics, while another sneered with predatory triumph, declaring that he finally had the bastard cornered. The captor's face twisted into a grotesque grin as he demanded his prey remain still, while he prepared to strike. Before the killing blow could land, a sharp mechanical screech tore through the rain as the inventory system activated. A blade erupted from thin air directly behind the attacker. Confusion instantly replaced malice as the man gasped, wondering how a weapon could possibly materialize from behind him. Blood splattered across the swordsman's mask as the counterattack began. The sound of tearing flesh and heavy impacts punctuated the downpour. An enemy stood over the wounded swordsman, chuckling that he had finally managed to draw blood. He admitted that watching the protagonist dismantle his subordinates had initially led him to believe he was facing some kind of monster. However, witnessing the blood and the struggle, he concluded that the nameless swordsman was merely human after all. The mob quickly gathered, their faces illuminated by sadistic glee, as they realized their target was mortal and vulnerable. A soft slide of steel preceded a sharp intake of breath. The leader's confidence suddenly faltered as he observed the man on the ground, questioning what was wrong with him. He demanded to know why the swordsman was laughing in the face of certain death. Silence gradually settled over the battlefield as the screaming finally died down. Rain poured over the dark pagodas of the fortress. A lone survivor gasped in terror, his mind racing with the horrifying realization that they might all perish at the hands of a single man. He desperately tried to justify his own existence, recalling how they had only ever shaken people down for spare change. Panic drove him to list his sins as if they were minor inconveniences. He cursed the heavens, insisting that far worse people existed elsewhere, and questioned why they had been targeted simply because they were easy prey for the strong. Biting his thumb in a fit of nerves, he resolved that he had to kill the intruder immediately. His eyes darted toward the back path leading to the leader's estate, Paradise Manor. Resigning himself to a final stand, he told the bastard to come and get it. Shadows shifted within the wooden structures as archers claimed the tactical advantage of the darkness. A sharp command to fire echoed through the rain, followed by the whistle of dozens of arrows taking flight. The projectiles rained down upon the lone figure standing in the courtyard. As the dust settled, a trembling voice asked if he was finally dead. A sickening crunch instantly shattered their hope. In the darkness, the sounds of tearing and swift, brutal movement replaced the silence. A man called out to his comrades, his voice shaking as he asked if they were all dead. He stood alone in the rain, his eyes widening with the horrifying realization that the shadows themselves had become his enemy. Footsteps approached with rhythmic, terrifying calm. The survivor stammered, asking if the figure was the nameless hero. He screamed, demanding to know what the swordsman wanted from them, and what they could have possibly done to deserve such wrath. He shouted that the protagonist was not the god of death, and possessed no right to judge them. His tirade ended abruptly in a spray of gore as the nameless swordsman's red eye fixed upon him. Standing over the fallen man, the swordsman spoke with cold finality, stating that he only desired one thing, their lives. The body hit the water with a heavy splash as the rain continued to wash away the blood. Lightning struck the hills behind the manor, illuminating a sprawling field of corpses. The protagonist looked toward the main estate, noting that only one target remained. That target was identified as Bang Po Yom, the leader of the Black Snake sect. The protagonist acknowledged that he was still comparatively weak against the members of the Black faction. To compensate, he had relied heavily on luring, ambushing, and even arson to thin their ranks. The night sky was stained with the orange glow of distant fires as he picked off his enemies one by one. By the time the leader of the White Tiger unit, known simply as the White Tiger, finally grew alarmed, more than half of his men were already dead. Local officials and townspeople eventually witnessed the carnage unfold, ultimately granting the protagonist and his killing spree a new moniker. They began to refer to him as the Nameless Righteous Swordsman. This newly forged identity served as a perfect mask, making it even easier to systematically dispose of the unorthodox faction. Upon the death of the White Tiger unit leader, the protagonist successfully reached level 5 and unlocked his first active skills. A blue interface confirmed the acquisition of Qinggong and the Three Forces sword art. He noted the body lightning technique of Qinggong alongside the first form of his new sword art, the Thousand Army Sweep, which provided a devastating horizontal slash. The moment for a direct confrontation with the Black faction had finally arrived. While children in the nearby streets playfully mimicked the legendary Nameless Righteous Swordsman, the brutal reality of their idol's campaign painted a far grimmer picture. The Red Wolf Gate had already been erased from existence, leaving only smoldering ruins in its wake. Within the region of Bongyang, the Black Society now stood as the sole remaining unorthodox power. Thunder rumbled across the sky as the narrative shifted to a secluded temple deep in the mountains. Inside, Bang Po Yam, the leader of the Black Society, sat in silent meditation. Clad in heavy robes adorned with twin serpent emblems and framed by long flowing white hair, he calmly awaited the inevitable. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the courtyard, casting stark shadows over a dark figure standing motionless in the downpour. Bang Po Yom did not flinch. His weathered face remained entirely composed as he inquired whether the intruder was indeed the celebrated Nameless Righteous Swordsman. Silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain against stone. The old leader scoffed, openly questioning why a supposed champion of justice would conceal himself so thoroughly beneath bandages and shadows. The intruder responded without hesitation, stating coldly that he was no man of justice. Confused, Bang Po-yaum pressed further, demanding to know why the stranger hunted the unorthodox factions, if not for the sake of righteousness. A terrifying, wide-mouthed grin slowly split the stranger's face as he clarified that he was absolutely not a righteous swordsman. Amused by the admission, Bang Po-yaum let out a dry laugh, remarking that the man had successfully deceived the entire martial world. The swordsman countered immediately, asserting that he had never deceived anyone. People had simply chosen to believe whatever narrative suited them. Intrigued by this chilling honesty, the old leader acknowledged him as a fascinating adversary. Tightening his grip on his weapon, he declared that he was prepared to cross the river of the dead that very day without a single regret. He challenged the intruder to step forward and demonstrate his true strength, regardless of his name or reputation. Without warning, the old master lunged, his blade igniting with a cold blue aura as the slaughter commenced. Steel met steel with a deafening crack that shattered the storm's rhythm. The impact sent a violent shockwave through the courtyard, instantly vaporizing falling raindrops into a fine mist. Crimson and azure energies clashed violently in the puddles below as the two combatants locked into a fierce struggle for dominance. The exchange rapidly escalated into a blur of high-speed strikes. Bang Po-yaum's eyes narrowed as he identified a subtle lapse in the swordsman's defense. Believing he had found a critical opening, he pushed his advantage forward, his blade whistling through the air to claim victory. The nameless swordsman remained unnervingly composed, quickly calculating that the old man's strike lacked the necessary range to land. However, his assessment proved flawed. Blood suddenly sprayed across the stone floor as a sharp cry of pain escaped his lips. A hidden edge had slipped through the dark cloak, carving deep into his flesh. Bang Po-yaum instantly recognized the truth and called out his discovery, noting that the swordsman's body was far from pristine and likely hindered by accumulated damage from previous battles. Wearing a predatory grin, the old leader intensified his assault, his movements growing increasingly aggressive as he caught the scent of fresh blood. Sparks erupted continuously as their blades collided. The nameless swordsman quickly grasped his opponent's strategy, realizing that Bang Po-yaum was deliberately and systematically targeting his existing wounds. He understood that every calculated swing was designed to reopen old injuries, forcing him into a desperate defensive rhythm. Internal pressure mounted as he acknowledged that maintaining this pace would guarantee his defeat. He concluded that he would need to sacrifice additional flesh to manufacture a single opening. Bang Po-yaum taunted him, demanding to know what could possibly be occupying his mind during such a lethal exchange. Ignoring the provocation, the nameless swordsman quietly prepared the Three Forces sword art. Confident that he finally had his opponent cornered, the old man lunged for the kill. Suddenly, the blue blade fractured and segmented, transforming into a flexible whip sword that slithered unpredictably through the air. Bang Po-yaum gasped in genuine shock at the weapon's sudden evolution. A massive explosion of kinetic energy and shattered debris erupted, marking the devastating collision of their respective martial arts. As the smoke and steam slowly cleared, rain slicked the stone courtyard as a colossal, ethereal serpent of blue light coiled through the heavy air. Bang Po-yaum observed the nameless swordsman with a twisted sense of fascination, quietly noting the youth's truly peculiar nature. He observed that the boy showed no hesitation in using his own body as bait, a tactic the elder deemed entirely beneath the dignity of a true martial artist. The leader continued his critique, labeling such methods as the crude work of an assassin or a common hunter. He questioned whether the boy truly understood the nature of a life or death duel, emphasizing that victory always favored the one who guarded his secrets most closely. With a predatory grin, Bang Po-yaum declared that he possessed far greater hidden depth than his opponent, calling the boy's transparent tactics a fatal flaw. Steel rang out against the stormy backdrop as the nameless swordsman silently readied his blade. Bang Po-yaum sneered, utterly convinced his foe had exhausted his arsenal. He coldly commanded the youth to die, his yellow eyes gleaming with malice. The spirit serpent lunged with a deafening roar, its translucent fangs bared as Bang Po-yaum spat out a final insult, branding his target a nameless murderous demon, while blue energy engulfed the courtyard. A massive explosion of force shattered the ground, throwing up a thick screen of grit and debris. Bang Po-yaum mocked the attempt to obscure his vision with dust, dismissing the tactic as entirely futile as he surged through the chaos, intent on delivering the killing blow. Victory seemed certain as the elder's blade finally found its mark, but his triumph instantly fractured into confusion. He quickly realized the body he had just pierced belonged to a fallen Black Society member, not his true target. Panic seized him as he understood he had been lured into a trap by a meticulously placed decoy. High above, the nameless swordsman calmly prepared the second form of the Three Forces sword art. The air screamed as the core striking slash descended in a pillar of blinding light. Bang Po-yaum howled in agony, barely managing to intercept the blade with his bare hand to spare his heart. Gasping through the pain, he insisted that the battle was far from over, his face contorted in sheer desperation. The elder lunged forward once more, vowing that he would not allow his prey to escape. In response, the nameless swordsman coldly activated his inventory system. A sudden spatial distortion erupted between them, causing Bang Po Yom to recoil in shock as a grotesque wall of cold flesh materialized from thin air. Blood and rain mingled on the elder's face as he coughed, staring in disbelief at the corpses that had appeared out of nowhere to intercept his strike. He quietly wondered if the boy still had more horrors concealed within his sleeves. Rage finally boiled over as he screamed at the hidden rat to reveal himself, calling the nameless swordsman a lunatic for weaponizing the dead as shields. Bang Po Yom demanded an immediate end to these cowardly tricks, his voice cracking under the strain. A chilling realization slowly dawned on him as a monstrous, red-eyed shadow loomed over his broken form. He began to question whether he had actually been the prey all along, his confidence as the sect leader crumbling into dust. He struck desperately at a shifting shadow, shouting that he had finally found his mark, only to realize with dawning horror that he was attacking another lifeless husk. The elder's eyes widened in pure terror as he was struck again, his own blood spraying into the dark, rain-soaked air. Slumped and thoroughly broken, Bang Po Yom finally understood that the nameless swordsman had systematically hunted down and slaughtered every single Black Society member across Bongyang. With his final, ragged breaths, he asked why such a complete massacre had ever been necessary. The youth simply looked down at him, quietly asking whether a reason was even required. A cold, unyielding philosophy permeated the storm-heavy air as the nameless swordsman reflected on the endless cycle of human violence. He mused that humanity had always been defined by murder, stretching from their most primitive ancestors to the peak of modern civilization. He asserted that the strong had always trampled and plundered the weak, and in this precise moment, he was simply the strong one. The storm finally began to clear as the nameless swordsman stood alone amidst the absolute carnage. He noted that with the complete eradication of the Black Society in Hohang, his preparations were finally finished. He turned his gaze toward the distant horizon, ready to advance to a stage where the opponents were even more formidable, and the prey far harder to hunt. A terrifying, satisfied smile spread across his face. He set his sights firmly on the broader Murim Jianghu, quietly wondering how much time remained before the inevitable Orthodox demonic war would ignite. Far away in a grand palace bathed in cold moonlight, deep within a shadowed throne room, a solitary figure tracked the passage of time, quietly observing that only 2 years remained. This realization triggered the activation of a grand, long-awaited plan. He summoned Guangwun, who immediately dropped to his knees in absolute loyalty. The master issued a single uncompromising directive. The first stratagem had to commence. The narrative shifted to the sun-drenched streets of Bongyang, where the atmosphere still hummed with the aftershocks of recent violence. Beneath the tavern awnings, locals gathered over drinks, marveling at how the nameless swordsman had finally eradicated the Black Society. One man raised a cup, openly debating whether the warrior should now be formally recognized as the nameless righteous swordsman. A skeptic at the table countered, questioning whether such widespread slaughter could ever be justified, even in the name of heroism. The defense erupted instantly. Another patron slammed his fist, arguing that merely chewing those criminals alive would not be sufficient punishment for their atrocities. He pointed out that since neither the imperial government nor the orthodox factions had ever cared for the common people, the nameless swordsman had been the only one willing to step into the void. The skeptic eventually relented, quietly conceding that without the swordsman, no one would have ever stood up for men like them. Cheers for the nameless swordsman echoed through the stone avenues as citizens pumped their fists in triumph, celebrating the removal of the Black Society from Bongyang. Amidst the jubilation, the swordsman himself led his horse through the throng, his expression entirely detached. He quietly concluded that his time in the city had reached its end, and determined that it was time to move on. A sudden blue flicker pierced his vision as a system warning materialized, reporting that an enemy with a level difference of 10 or more had entered a 20-meter radius. His spirit eye pulsed, immediately drawing his attention toward the dark entrance of a nearby stable. Through the shadows, he identified the figures within. Ji Daehyo, leader of the Black Crow unit, and the formidable Danri Kyeonwoo, patriarch of the Danri clan and the warrior known as the Flying Heavenly Demon Sword. Concealing himself in the darkness, So Sam watched as the patriarch stroked his prized horse, preparing to part with the animal. Kyeonwoo revealed his intentions, mentioning an upcoming marriage arrangement for the Namgung clan head's second daughter during the next full moon. His ambition was laid bare. He declared he was willing to send his cherished horse, and even his own children, to the Namgung clan to secure the alliance, claiming he would go to even greater lengths, if necessary. The conversation turned to marriage pledges and the 9 vows ceremony, but Kyeonwoo dismissed the complexity, comparing the political union to laying logs across a stream. He demanded results regardless of the methods required, ordering Ji Daehyo to ensure it happened. His eyes flashed with a terrifying intensity as he commanded a departure for the following morning, pointing directly at the nearby servant, So Sam, and ordering that the boy be taken along to handle the horse prostrate on the ground. So Sam seamlessly maintained his disguise as a lowly servant. Kyeon-woo confirmed the boy's necessity for the animal's care, and Ji Dae-hyo acknowledged the patriarch's command. As the leaders withdrew, So Sam's mind turned inward. He recognized that relying solely on system-generated skills would not be enough. He needed to acquire authentic, properly taught martial arts. He reflected on his failed attempts to recreate combat techniques by merely mimicking the movements of Black Crow warriors, acknowledging it had amounted to nothing more than hollow imitation. Weighing his options, he concluded that hunting for a secret manual was the worst possible path, while finding a true master represented the optimal route. At 18 years old, he understood that time was rapidly running out to begin proper training. The impending journey to the Namgung clan, a family wielding absolute power in Anhui, represented his greatest opportunity to find a legitimate path forward. Gazing toward the horizon, he anticipated encountering far stronger prey. Meanwhile, the Black Crow unit assembled in rigid formation as Ji Dae-hyo surveyed the ranks, confirming that the horse was prepared. He quickly noted that the patriarch's children were absent. Danri Ganghai was likely lingering at a tavern, while Danri Hui would join them later. With a sharp command, the unit began its march out of the city gates. The procession came to an abrupt halt when a loud crash resonated from a nearby building. Ji Dae-hyo rubbed his temples in visible frustration, questioning whether this was happening once again. The disturbance was quickly traced to Danri Ganghai, the patriarch's eldest son. Though recognized as a martial arts prodigy of immense natural talent, his character was deeply rotten. He was a man consumed by wine and women, leaving a trail of broken bodies and terrible rumors wherever he went, and he was currently in the process of beating another victim. The system warning flared violently again, signaling a massive level difference. A subordinate called out to young Master Danri as the air grew unbearably heavy. Ganghai snarled at his unseen challenger, threatening to kill the bastard, but the atmospheric pressure shifted instantly. A true master had entered the fray. So Sam observed from a distance, immediately realizing that a warrior of significant power had arrived. An old man descended into the street, wreathed in crackling green energy. He stood over the wreckage with his arms crossed, his sheer presence dominating the entire area. The narrative confirmed the terrifying reality. This was a master of overwhelming skill, and the gap between him and the frivolous young master was an unbridgeable chasm that could not be crossed. Through mere bravado, dust choked the air as Ganghai coughed, his arrogance thoroughly crushed by the sudden oppressive weight of the elder's aura. The system continued to scream its warning regarding the level disparity. Ganghai attempted to muster a threat, pointing a trembling finger and cursing the intruder, but his voice completely failed him against the master's gravitational presence. The subordinate watched in pure horror as the young master was forcibly humbled in the dirt. The old man's eyes glowed with a piercing, predatory light, marking him as a force of nature amidst the ruined street. Ji Dae-hyo rushed forward, his voice booming as he commanded everyone to halt. He moved desperately toward the confrontation, fully aware that he had to intervene before the Danri clan's eldest son was completely destroyed by a superior power. Emerald energy crackled violently as a legendary technique manifested in the street. A witness trembled, unable to process the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure as the soul-chasing flying butterfly took form. A fallen man gasped in sheer terror, questioning what manner of expert stood before him. Tang Wu answered with cold authority, noting that for a mere provincial laborer, the boy's eyes had not completely rotted away. He formally identified himself as the soul-chasing poison hand, a title that carried devastating weight across the martial world. He explained that Murim's hierarchy was absolute, crowned by the 2 gods, followed by the 3 monsters, the 5 pinnacles and the 10 greats. As the supreme master of the Sichuan Tang clan, and a seated member of the 10 greats, his name alone commanded reverence. The legend of his poison was clear. Those who offended him could not escape his grasp, not even in death. A bystander quickly realized the catastrophic implications of the incident, understanding that if the Danri scion had truly angered a master of Tang Wu's caliber, the entire clan could face permanent ruin. As Hua approached and respectfully addressed him as her grandfather, Tang Wu decided the matter was settled. He declared it time to depart, dismissing the victims as ignorant country folk who simply lacked proper discipline. He expressed hope that the display would finally teach the survivors how vast and unforgiving the martial world truly was. Clicking his tongue in mild annoyance, he criticized a descendant of the Orthodox faction for drinking and causing public disturbances so early in the morning. Despite his legendary temper, he noted he could not bring himself to show outright cruelty to a child of the Orthodox line. He left a final sharp warning that the man must be told his habit of harassing random women would inevitably prevent him from living out his natural lifespan. Tang Wu prepared to leave alongside Hua, but a sudden thought anchored him to the spot. He clenched his fist, his gaze slowly shifting toward the rear of the crowd. Instructing Hua to wait, he turned his attention entirely to the horse handlers standing quietly in the shadows. So-Sam observed the legendary master approaching, quietly wondering why such a towering figure would direct his attention toward a lowly servant. Tang Wu stopped directly in front of him. When Hua questioned the sudden change in plans, Tang Wu dismissed her concern, stating plainly that he only had a single question for the boy. So-Sam remained deeply confused, questioning whether this monumental master truly intended to address him directly. Tang Wu stared into the boy's eyes and demanded to know his name. So-Sam offered nothing but silent stillness. Tang Wu repeated the question, his eyes swirling with intense emerald energy, as he pointed a glowing finger toward the youth. The tension in the street thickened considerably. Danri Wu quickly interjected, explaining that the boy was merely a horse handler who could not speak. Tang Wu turned his sharp gaze toward the patriarch, questioning whether the youth was genuinely mute. He hummed thoughtfully, studying So-Sam with an unnerving intensity. So-Sam felt the master's gaze lingering on him, as though he were examining a rare artifact or hidden treasure. Green energy swirled within the master's irises, signaling a sudden and profound shift in interest. So-Sam instantly recognized the gravity of the moment. He understood that if a master of Tang Wu's stature viewed him as a valuable discovery, it represented an unprecedented opportunity. It was the exact opening he needed to finally shed the suffocating identity of a lowly horse handler and claim a completely new destiny. Without warning, Tang Wu's hand shot forward, seizing So-Sam's arm. Green energy surged violently through the boy's limb, crackling with raw power. A manic, wide-eyed laugh erupted from the master as he sensed the boy's staggering potential. So-Sam stood perfectly still, his arm wreathed in the master's poisonous light. Tang Wu inquired whether the group was currently traveling to the Namgung clan. Qian Wu confirmed that they were indeed journeying to finalize a marriage alliance. When asked about the child's specific role, Qian Wu explained that the boy served as the primary handler for the Fergana horse being delivered as a diplomatic gift. Tang Wu immediately declared that he would be taking the youth with him. Qian Wu panicked, urgently arguing that without the boy, no one would be capable of controlling the prized stallion. Tang Wu effortlessly dismissed the concern, suggesting they simply complete the horse's delivery to the Namgung estate first. He decided he would officially claim the boy after their arrival. He asked Qian Wu whether this resolution was acceptable. Qian Wu stood completely paralyzed, sweating profusely and utterly incapable of refusing a demand issued by one of the 10 greats. He desperately pleaded with Senior Tang to accept the youth as an alternative offering. Tang Wu responded with a booming laugh, openly declaring the gesture highly favorable. With a sharp, commanding glance, the elder instructed the boy to cease idling and follow him immediately. A heavy sigh escaped the Black Crow commander as he gripped his head in visible frustration. He barked rapid orders, directing his men to rush the young master to a physician, while ordering the rest of the unit to prepare for immediate departure. So-Sam stood silently beside the horse, his expression entirely unreadable as the commander's face contorted under mounting stress. Nearby, Tang Wu's eyes shimmered with a predatory green hue, his attention fixed entirely on the youth. As dusk surrendered to a cold, full moon, the procession halted at a sprawling, multi-storied inn. Lantern light spilled across the courtyard where the soldiers gathered, and the unit leader formally announced their overnight stay. Inside, the atmosphere warmed with flickering candles and the low murmur of resting warriors, but So-Sam sought solitude. He retreated to the dim, straw-scented stable. He reflected on how significantly his control over the inventory had evolved since the Black Society campaign. He noted that his current summoning range now extended roughly 1 meter from his body, and he quietly questioned whether dedicated practice could push those boundaries even further. Visions of cold steel and pale corpses drifted through his mind, objects he could now retrieve or launch from the void at will. However, he acknowledged a critical tactical flaw. The projection speed remained far too slow for a true master to fail to react or deflect. Focusing his intent, he silently triggered the inventory mechanism. A faint blue light flickered between his fingers as he manipulated the spatial energy. While recognizing his growing proficiency, he realized a far more potent application remained untapped. The breakthrough arrived when he understood that anything making physical contact with his body could be transferred directly into the inventory. This internal gateway would allow him to consume, absorb, and store matter from within himself. He immediately classified the concept as a divine technique, mentally naming it the inventory divine art. His eyes widened as the staggering potential of this self-contained arsenal settled into his mind. Footsteps soon echoed through the dark corridor, as a woman with short, stylish hair approached the stable doors. She muttered under her breath, complaining about her grandfather's unreasonable demand to summon someone like So-Sam at such a late hour. With a dismissive wave, she ordered the boy to follow her immediately. She led him through the inn's quiet halls to a set of ornate sliding doors, formally announced their entrance, and stepped inside. The chamber was vast, dominated by a massive golden dragon mural that sprawled across the back wall. Tang Wu sat alone in the center of the wooden floor, a deceptively small figure dwarfed by the room's grandeur. Without preamble, he gestured toward a raised platform and commanded Sosam to ascend and sit cross-legged. The boy obeyed with silent precision, moving across the polished floor. Tang Wu wasted no time, bluntly ordering him to strip completely. Sosam removed his robes, revealing a lean, heavily scarred back. Tang Wu observed the physique with quiet approval, noting that the boy's underlying bodily structure was remarkably sound. He reached for a nearby lacquered box, announcing his intention to deploy the Dragon Phoenix golden needles. The granddaughter's face instantly paled, and she questioned what her grandfather was attempting to do. Her voice trembled as she asked whether he truly intended to proceed with such an extreme measure. Tang Wu ignored her panic, turning his attention back to the boy. He asked whether Sosam was familiar with the old saying regarding oranges. He explained the metaphor in detail. An orange cultivated in the fertile south of Huainan would transform into a bitter, useless trifoliate orange if replanted in the cold north of Huaibei. He drew a direct parallel to the martial clans, equating Huainan to the Danri lineage and the north to the Tang clan. He declared that if Sosam was the orange, he was about to be forcibly replanted. Tang Wu then revealed his true purpose. He intended to perform a grueling cultivation ritual. He warned the boy that the pain would be so severe that death might seem preferable, but he promised that survival would grant immeasurable power and permanently cure his muteness. He asked directly whether Sosam was willing to endure it. The granddaughter erupted in protest, horrified that he would make such a grave decision without consulting the clan elders. Her eyes widened in shock as she gripped her head in despair. Tang Wu remained entirely unmoved, his focus locked solely on the youth sitting before him. A moment of sharp clarity washed over Sosam as he finally understood the elder's true ambitions. Golden light bathed the chamber as Tang Wu leaned over a glowing vessel, his weathered face etched with ancient resolve. He asked the youth before him whether he was truly prepared to bear the Tang surname. Beneath him, Sosam met the elder's gaze with piercing red eyes, his expression carefully blank as the weight of the proposition settled between them. A lacquered golden box rested nearby, its lid open to reveal a collection of long, slender needles that caught the flickering candlelight.